Lucia's trying to connect right now. She just said, sorry.
I wonder how many people I annoyed.
Well, let's not open that can of worms tonight, Ethan.
All right, we're live, guys.
Okay. Good to know. So
Got it.
Lucia's coming in.
She's trying. I just got an email.
Okay. We'll wait then a minute.
I got to go online to see if I can actually see what you guys are seeing on YouTube, okay? I'm getting a weird screen here.
Want me to look?
I'm pulling up YouTube right now. It's looking all right.
You guys are seeing us or you?
Yep. Yep.
You are? I got to go online to see if I can actually see. Okay, we're good. Then I'm going to shut this. Stay there for a second, will you, Ethan? Just make sure we're good.
Yep.
All right, we're still there?
Yep.
Okay, perfect.
It's delayed a little bit, but yep.
Well, yeah, it is. Don't have both going at the same time. You may lose your mind.
The time warp.
All right, I'm gonna let people in. And it looks like Ethan and Krista, we got fair amount of people here, but we're gonna touch on short term very briefly, I think, tonight. So I don't want to keep these people too long. They'll probably be happy to go eat some dinner. All right, they're gonna come in now, okay?
Sure.
Lucia,
Hi
there
there.
you are.
Hi,
Here's
Lucia.
Lucia.
You made it.
Lucia, you're still muted.
There we go. Is that better?
Yeah.
I may have to jump off for a little while. We're still waiting for an attorney call. I'm still in Colorado, so.
All
It
right.
looks like
Yeah,
you're
I gotta mute. The dogs are getting fed. Hold on.
it- ah.
I would just add for people that are joining, sometimes it takes a little while to admit people into the room. So bear with me if you're sitting out there in the waiting room. I guess you don't know, but we'll get to you quickly as I can. All right. Ethan, are
Okay.
they being
Yeah.
fed? All right.
I think the barking is done.
Good.
All right. So this is the Camden Planning Board meeting of Thursday, January 18. It's a Zoom only meeting. We can take comments from the public at times. It's really just a workshop tonight. We're going to sort of adjust the agenda a little bit with some people in attendance. And I'm guessing that they're mostly here for the short-term rentals, and we're going to move that to the top of the agenda. So that will be number 3, and then we'll switch peers to number 4. So the first item on the agenda is any public comment on non-agenda items.
Yes, my name is Jeff Jordan, and I have a comment, and you can tell me if this is the right place to speak about it or not. I live at 6 Ocean Way in Camden. Does the planning board or the town have a harbor resiliency plan or a harbor resiliency committee? I'm specifically thinking about what's happened in the storms over the last couple of days.
Yeah, that's a really good question.
I can touch on that,
Excuse
Ethan.
me. Yep, I'll let Jeremy jump in.
All right, thanks. Jeff, thanks. Good question. I I will say from a climate and resiliency perspective, the town, every department is focused on that and has at a kind of at one of the levels of review when we do review town projects and we review things going on in town. So whether it's public works or planning and development or Chris Farley at fire and EMS, we all are constantly looking at climate change issues and resiliency and how we adapt to them, how we respond to them. We've started the state geological surveys flood resiliency checklist program. Ethan helped do that with me. That goes back a couple of years now, Ethan, or a year and a half or so. We're going to finish that. And I had applied for a grant, and not everyone knows this yet. And I see Select Board Member French is on here. She probably hasn't heard this yet either, but I had applied for a grant to look at redesigning the public landing to make it more resilient to sea level rise and storm surge. Actually, 2 grants, and they're a total of $60,000. And I had just started that. These 2 storms, and actually I'm going to say 3 storms, because in 13 and a half months or so, if you go back to the December storm of last Christmas, there's been 3 storms in the last almost year that were really devastating and impactful to the harbor. These last 2 were certainly massive, in their scope and in their damage. I am looking right now, and I spoke with the state office, the GOPIF office, which is the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation in the Future, which they manage the climate action program and the climate action grants. That's the $50,000 grant that we received for the public landing project. And we received a $10,000 grant from the Shore and Harbor Planning program from the Department of Marine Resources. I spoke with both of them after chatting with Audra Taylor, the town manager, over the last few days about this very issue, Jeff, about a harbor resilience plan. And based on how our public landing withstood the last 2 storms, when you actually look at our infrastructure, meaning like ocean facing infrastructure, the boardwalk, the retaining wall, the float systems, the pilings, our systems handled it very well. And we did what we thought was a very significant repair last year after the December storm to get the harbor ready for spring. That withstood both these storms incredibly well. Obviously, we had overland flooded the harbor master building and other infrastructure we had there, and those are certainly things we got to deal with. But the reality I think we kind of came to was that I think a priority really ought to be exactly what you're saying, is a harbor resiliency plan, and adaptation plan. So I've reached out to the state to see if we can change our focus from focusing just on creating construction documents for the public landing and actually do a whole harbor resiliency adaptation plan that encompasses our infrastructure, which, because the Shore and Harbor Planning Program those funds have to be spent on municipal infrastructure. But the $50,000 climate action grant can be spent in a much broader way. So we're actually looking at right now about tweaking that grant over to a whole harbor resiliency adaptation plan to prepare one for the town. We saw so much devastation and destruction. I mean, you look at all the pier. I mean, we'll touch on it when we talk about piers, but I think just about there's 7 piers in the harbor were destroyed or demolished or damaged in the storm. And we had wharfs and dock systems that are failing or have failed or had significant damage to them. And we need to get everyone on board and provide as much assistance, I think, that we can to adjacent property owners and business owners and landowners in the harbor. So that's going to be our focus. And again, Stephanie, you probably haven't heard this yet, but that's going to be the focus. I think that is a real priority right now in light of the way that our public landing handled these last 2 storms with little or no damage. The damage was cleanup. to be honest with you, in the parking lot. Certainly Steve Pixley's the Harbor Master building needs to be relocated and not inundated with water on these storm events, and that's relatively easy to deal with. So that's the plan, Jeff, right now, is to bring a consultant on board this spring to do that. It makes a lot of sense, and I'll probably be sharing that with the select board on Tuesday. I think people have been calling for it. It was a huge, massive event. And so we need to help our abutting property owners. We'll certainly look at Steamboat Landing, the Yacht Club property, Lake Beach, and Public Landing and Harbor Park. But we'll look at it in the same scope that we're looking at all of the other private investment and private property in the harbor, to give them some assistance and give them some planning tools and best practices so that they can deal with sea level rise and storm surge moving forward.
Thank you. One of the reasons I asked that is after the December 2022 storm, here I live at Harbor House, the condominiums right next to Lyman Morris. We have a nice seawall here. For people who haven't really spent much time looking at that, about 100 feet in front of it is a man-made, disorganized seawall, riprap, if you will, that I think was installed in an effort to kind of slow waves down before they got to the proper seawall. And we started talking about what would it take to add to that, not the seawall, the proper seawall, but the disorganized seawall. The idea being that if our major seawall here got breached, there'd be a huge, not just problem with the buildings here, but there would be all kinds of erosion into the harbor. And, I think this has lots of implications beyond just property. Both of those things are important. And is what you're talking about going to allow addressing those types of things?
Well, that's a massive question, to be honest with you. That's a massive permitting project too, to permit something like that. And I think it's important to.
We're aware of that.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important to realize too that, and I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it because it's not an agenda item. And I certainly welcome you to come in and chat with me whenever, or call me or whatever. But I think it's important to recognize too that when we armor shoreline, I know you're talking about something that's in the water, but when we do armor shorelines, that impact, it may protect the property that you're armoring, but that wave action and the force of the ocean hitting that armor actually follows down along that armor to an adjacent property. So sometimes what ends up happening with some of these, and we saw it over, I think in Sherman's Cove right now near the Rixon Pier that we just permitted and they just built, that's no longer there. If you look at adjacent to them, what's happened to some of the adjacent property that isn't armored, there's some pretty negative impacts over there. So I think that's why these plans, if we do something, you really need to be holistic and look at everything.
We were actually planning on having it studied to make sure that wasn't happening, or that we would know what it was.
Why don't you reach out to me offline and we can chat? This is the kind of conversation that needs to happen.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in real quick and just point out, Jeffrey, thanks for jumping in, and it is something we look at. One of the things that's noteworthy is the town comp plan which was drafted in 2017, and I think it's on a 10-year cycle, makes minimal reference to sea level rise, which is pretty crazy considering the Paris Accord and everything was happening in 2016, I believe, or whatever. But not to criticize those who worked on the comp plan, but it does nothing to address sea level rise. And that's something that also, we can't fix everything overnight, but that's something else we'll be looking at when we get to the next revision. And it's something that as a planning board, sometimes we feel a little bit like our hands are tied because you have height requirements on the harbor or anywhere else, and you can't raise buildings certain height above to address sea level rise, things like that. We ran into that with the Lyman Morris Marina application. But it is something that all of us on the planning board have at the forefront of our concern, and it's good to hear that Jeremy's got something going. And I think it's good to look at it from a holistic approach, harbor and shoreline. So thanks for your comment, Jeffrey.
Thank you.
Anyone else with a non-agenda item?
Ethan, I see this Malcolm Tisdale has a hand raised. I don't know, what's that?
Okay, I'm looking. Go ahead, Malcolm.
Yeah, actually, I'm his wife. He asked if I would speak
Yeah.
on behalf because he doesn't get home till 5:30. I'm just going back to the short-term rental, which
hold
was
on.
on the agenda. Is that
Yeah.
okay?
No,
Well,
we're not.
no, if we're getting to short-term rentals, that's actually on the agenda, so it's not a non-agenda item.
Got
Right.
it. Okay.
So that will be coming up shortly. Thank you, though.
Yeah, perfect. All right. Is that it?
Good.
Ethan, am I slow or you got an issue? Is it me?
Oh, I think I accidentally muted, probably for the better. Um, I was just saying I don't see any more non-agenda items, and we'll
No.
move on then. We have no approval of minutes for this meeting. So then, as indicated, we've kind of adjusted. We're going to flip the workshop on short-term rentals up to number 3, and then address peers at number 4. And I'll just preface the short-term rental discussion, and I hope it's not to everybody's great disappointment, but right now we're at a stage in the workshop with this where we feel like we have pretty good language that's been included in the packet. And we're having Shenley and Jeremy continue to work on that, but we're not planning to have a significant discussion tonight on the short-term rentals. We have a lot of discussion we have to have on the piers, and that's coming up, and that's under the pressure of a moratorium and making sure that we get things to the select board so that can be handled. We have received some public comment via email and letters, I guess, and possibly phone calls. Jeremy and Shenley will be sharing those and including those in the packet. So, I guess I the woman who spoke earlier, Tisdale, if you wanted to jump in, I will give you the opportunity to say something because I haven't heard from you before. The board hasn't heard from you before, but I'm really going to ask you to keep your comments to around 2 minutes because we really have a lot to get to, and we're not going to be having an involved discussion on the short-term rentals really tonight. But
Okay,
go
I
ahead.
appreciate you giving me the opportunity to speak on my husband's behalf. I just from what I listened to in the previous recordings, I get the impression that you're kind of putting all the eggs in one basket of short-term rentals being, these strictly weekly rentals that are, profit-making situations. And I can assure you that's not the case. My husband's family has had the particular house on Hope Road since 1921, and they never bought it for the purpose of renting. It's just that at this point in time, the property taxes are so high that in order to keep it in the family, it's a necessity to rent short term, but we also rent long term. And I understand that you're trying to make, available housing for affordable and for available. And I can tell you that we do rent both short and long term, and we have fulfilled the need of people like seasonal workers. And one of the issues that we both have, and that my husband especially had asked me to speak on, was that if you put barriers such as very high costs on permits, as well as limiting the number of permits that are there for short-term rentals, what's going to happen is it's going to, over time, the demand is going to outstrip the supply, and then the cost of long-term rentals are going to go up because, for example, people like us who won't be able to afford to cover the taxes, we're just going to have to jack up our long-term rentals price, and so it's kind of defeating the purpose. And I just wanted you all to understand that we would prefer not to rent, really, but it's just not feasible at this time. So anyway, said my piece. I'm hoping that you look at this as not necessarily a one size fits all approach because, for example, we did rent previously to seasonal workers, and if they had rented for only 26 days, I know you're looking at 28 as the short-term rental, we wouldn't have been able to rent to them. And that would have just been because A, we might have been the people who didn't get the lottery for the permit, and B, maybe the cost of the permit would have been, extremely high and not worth it for us to do that. So thank you for listening, and I
Yep.
hope you can take those to, just into consideration.
Yeah, appreciate it. And again, also, I encourage anybody else who has public comment they want to give on this matter, go ahead and submit written comments if you haven't already.
Okay.
As I indicated, we
Yeah.
have a short period of time here, so we're gonna have to move on. I see Jen has her hand up. Go ahead, Jen.
Good evening, everyone. Yeah, thank you. I'm here as a Camden resident. I'm also here as the association executive for the Mid-Coast Board of Realtors. I just wanted to refer back, Ethan, you mentioned the comp plan. 2017 is the last edition, I believe. It's the most latest version of the comp plan. I just wanted to I've looked through it briefly. It's a 300-page document, so I understand it's quite hefty to read through, but I just did want to refer to page 86 on there under the housing recommendations, questions and strategies. And I quote, listed after each recommendation, question and strategy are the individual boards, committees, groups responsible for implementing, monitoring and or evaluating these issues. So as a representative for the Mid-Coast Board of Realtors, I wanted to invite the planning board to engage in a conversation about short-term rentals, as it is a property issue. I have not received any direct contact from anybody on the planning board to elicit conversations, so I am extending that to you, to the planning board, so that as per your comp plan, it does actually quote that the Board of Realtors should be included in any conversations around housing issues.
Okay, you've been heard, and again, our meetings are noticed
Ethan?
Publicly, and we're not going to, at this moment, we're not going to engage in a conversation, but we do invite you to attend our next workshop when we will be discussing and we'll be having public hearings. So, all of those things your input is absolutely welcome, and appreciate that you jumped in, but we really do need to move on to this other matter and the peers, and I appreciate the insight and the site to the comp plan. And if you want to be on a email list when short-term rentals are on the agenda, you can contact the planning department. There's Jeremy and Shenley, and they send out an email. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Do you want me
Ethan,
to?
I was just going to ask, I sort of feel like we are at the stage with this that we're pretty close to being ready to move forward with the hearing.
Yeah.
Scheduling.
That's yep.
And I heard you just mention another workshop. I don't know that we really need to have any more workshops with the remaining few.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I corrected myself to a public hearing. So yeah. You were right about that. Yeah.
I'm wondering, do we want to go ahead and set that?
I don't think we're ready to set that quite yet, Ethan.
Okay.
I think we need to have final good language, and we're almost there, but we're not there.
Okay.
So I think we'll touch on this one more time, and then have a hearing after that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I only mention that for everyone who's watching and listening, that there will be that public hearing,
right,
where we will have, and there will be public hearings with the select board too. So there will be lots of opportunities, for further
to contribute, right. Right. What we're working on right now is still just a draft, and as Krista was indicating, there'll be a public hearing for us. There'll be a public hearing for the select board, depending on what they feel. And also, again, I invite anyone who wishes to submit written comments. That's a very efficient way to get your issues before the planning board and the select board, and we do read them all and consider them all. Okay.
I would also urge those who are new to this process or on around this one to go back and look at the videos of our various meetings where we have considered a lot of these issues.
Yeah.
And dealt with them at length.
Can I just touch on a couple of things here and then we'll move on to peers? So in order to do the short term, I think we've talked about it, chapter 215, which is the current short-term rental registration or code. So I think people forget that we do have a code already, a requirement to register short-term rentals that are not people's primary residence. That is a requirement. I will tell you that we're slowly getting more and more of them to trickle in. I think that's important to note. So that's chapter 215, and that's the real meat of this that Shenley's been working on and guided by the planning board. Chapter 290 is the zoning code, and in order for these codes to work, for this to work, we've got to allow certain uses in chapter 290 for these transient guests. And so what Shenley is prepared, and she'll briefly show you so that you all have it because it was included in the packet, which is the changes that would be needed to chapter 290, which is the zoning code, in order to implement the changes in 215, which is the short-term rental registration code. Shenley will do that in 1 second. And then I will say I have heard from a handful of people about data, and I think that's been brought up before, on what kind of data we have. And I think the initial hope when the select board sent to voters chapter 215 is that we would start to get data on how many short-term rentals we have in town. By compliance, looking at the numbers, we were at like 12 or 15 a few months ago. Now we're up to probably like 22, maybe 23. AirDNA has provided some data. I've gotten that from a handful of individuals. Mid-Coast Council of Governments is now using AirDNA, looking at data and looking at for Camden for us. They look at 2 sites only, AirDNA's number. And when I refer to sites like Airbnb and Vrbo, there are up to like 70 other sites out there or something, 40 other sites that do short-term rentals. So Granicus has a somewhat different number right now than AirDNA has. I'm trying to parse through those. I'm going to send everyone that information in the next week, within the next few days to a week, so that you guys will have it, and we'll put that up on the town's website. Shenley's working now to organize some website information so that people's comments will be in a document and listed in a folder. Draft of the code amendments would be in a folder, and data would be in another folder, if you will. And so people can have that information provided. Granicus will be in another folder. I think that was a very insightful workshop that they did with you guys before. So that's how that's the plan right now, Ethan, and for everyone out there. We'll have that information on the town's website, hopefully within the next week. And again, we'll get that data to you folks. It is varying. I mean, I think it's important to realize that some of these, most of the hotels and bed and breakfasts also advertise on Airbnb and Vrbo. So when you're getting a number from Granicus, they don't know which ones are necessarily bed and breakfasts or hotels. And those same hotels and motels show up on AirDNA's information. And so there's a lot that needs to be looked at, but there's anywhere between 215 to 400 short-term rentals in Camden is the number. And I know that's a wide number, but a wide gap there, but it also has to do with active listings and also time of year. There's a whole host of reasons.
Right. It's not an easy thing. And we've always wanted and appreciated the request for good data, what's been our request from the get-go. Appreciate that it's not easy. But thank you for that. And just let us know when that's all available in the on the site, and when it's, to us. And thank you. That's great. And thanks again to both you and Shenley for the work you're doing.
Yeah, and I'll hand it over to Shenley quickly, just so if you want to do this, Ethan, if you don't want to, it's fine. I think it's Shenley spent it's a little bit of work. Again, what we have to do is we got to make these definitions that you're creating, make them allowed uses. And you wanted to talk about ones that are primary residence as commercial. So we fit those into where they need to be and come up with definitions. So
Right.
you want Shenley to share the screen, Ethan? Is that okay? We shouldn't take too long.
Yeah, that's fine.
Shenley?
Okay. Hold on.
And this is going off the 290 working draft, correct?
Yes, that's right. If I can, there's my share screen. Thank you. Hang
I
on.
looked that over earlier. I hope the rest of the board had a chance to look at it.
And this is what was on the town website for information. I would say that in the brief, there's something that is a little tweaked here that we need to tweak. The accessory dwelling unit provision about when they were constructed. Do you remember that 2000? Actually,
Right, the date on that.
the date on that. The town has actually had, and this is where Shenley's showing you right here.
Mhm.
Going back to 1997 is when the town actually first allowed accessory dwelling units, and back then they were required to be someone's primary residence. So that didn't happen in 2020. I was a little confused, and there's a lot going on. So
Mhm.
it goes back to 1997. That was not a new creation that you guys did in 2020. It was in the existing ordinance definition. You just changed some of the meat of the definition, if you will. But that 2020 date and what Shenley's showing here will go back to 1997 because since then, that's how accessory apartments or dwelling units could be created.
Uh-oh.
Okay. Shenley, you good?
Got it. Yeah. Oh, so this is actually, like we said, this is going to be the proposed amendment to 290. Now 215, remember, implements it. And this is in the zoning ordinance here. So the accessory dwelling unit is before you just because we have to get that definition to the voters. This summer? Is it this summer we have to do it? Because it goes with LD 2003.
Yeah. Yeah,
for the affordable housing, but it does have an impact on short-term rental, so we have to keep it moving with short-term rental, so we make sure everything corresponds. But we just here's the definitions. This would be, and we might change this name, but it's accessory vacation rental. We might say accessory vacation short-term rental, and this is where a person owns a property and it is their primary residence. You can read it for yourself, and they may or may not be present during a tenancy of the short-term rental. But like I said, some of these are already outdated that we're showing you, so we do have to tweak this. We'll have to tweak this ADU definition. We may tweak these three definitions of the three different types of accessory dwelling units. But I think once we're really close to getting it to where I think you all want it. So, and once we do that, we'll be able to put out facts and maybe correspond better with the public so that there's no confusion as to what it is that you all are actually proposing to do with short-term rental. But until we get these definitions kind of nailed down, we're kind of in limbo till we figure out exactly what we're doing. And we want to make sure that we address all these different various scenarios that people have in life, that we don't want to step on, we don't want to hinder people from doing what they want to do just because we're trying to do something else. So we're trying to look at all the, the angles of this before we fine tune the definition. So like you said before, accessory vacation rental, the seasonal vacation rental, this would be like your cottage.
Likely the camp that Mrs. Tisdale was referring to.
Right. And we did get their email comments, Tisdale. So we have all that to give to you all later. Yeah. And the vacation rental is the same thing as kind of like we were talking about commercial. So in the old days, this is the old
right. Yeah. Back all the way back to 2 weeks ago.
Right. A lot's happened.
I get it. No, this looks good. And
yeah.
And it's pretty clear to me. And so again, just to run through the different definitions, accessory vacation rental is what we were calling accessory to a residential use.
Yeah,
exactly.
And then the seasonal vacation rental is what we were calling seasonal camps.
To the camp.
Yeah.
And then vacation rental is what we were calling commercial.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, Ethan or Shenley.
Yeah.
Commercial vacation rental, I thought was a better description. I mean, both of the other two definitions have qualifiers in front of them. And I mean, to me, it just made a lot more sense to keep
So-
that commercial.
I understand,
You-
Pat. If you follow along, Shenley, can you go down a little bit? So, Pat, these uses, remember, these are uses. You see, in the R1, rural one, RU1 that Shenley has on the screen.
Yeah.
We allow in every zone, there are permitted uses and and then there are special exception
There's
uses. But there are
residential.
residential uses and then there are commercial uses allowed in every zone. So you don't need to call something commercial if it falls under the commercial permitted use. And that's the only place that those fall under is under the commercial uses section of the zone, the actual zoning district. So this is a much better way. Like we don't say commercial uses, if you use this example, commercial uses, commercial outdoor storage of boats. It's assumed that that's commercial because that's the only commercial
under this
activity that's
category.
allowed. If
Right.
that makes sense. That's how we've approached this.
I see what you're saying though.
It's much
Right.
It's-
I see both sides. I understand what Jeremy is saying. I also take Pat's point that when we're looking at these three definitions, having commercial on there might make it clearer to the voter.
That's
Okay.
what I was thinking.
Okay.
yeah.
Right.
we
And
can add commercial
that's,
there.
I mean, I think that's open for board discussion,
Mhm.
but I think that's sort of where Pat was headed with that. It's
Yeah.
not that it doesn't fit in the code the way we see it. The code looks great, right? Because you see that it falls under the commercial side of the code,
Mhm.
but it's just as far as we,
Okay.
explaining things to the voter to distinguish between what we call an accessory vacation rental
Right.
versus a
I
commercial.
think it would make a lot more sense to the voters to have that commercial.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
What we'll do is we'll have that available. And if that's what everyone wants to do, we'll just put that in there. We can, again, I think these are one of those things that can be tweaked during the hearing. We can either have it
Sure.
as an option or not as an option. You guys go with it. But point
Yeah.
Sure,
taken.
and I'm open to input from the rest of the board if anybody has any thoughts on that.
Lucia.
So I have a little bit of a different thought. I mean, it's not about that. It's about the terminology or I should say the name of each one of these rentals. And I just think it would be a little clearer, although this is a great job, but because all of these in the descriptions say short-term rental. So again, for clarity, I don't know if it would make more sense to have the heading as accessory short-term vacation rental, seasonal short-term vacation rental, and short-term vacation rental, so that it's consistent with the description.
Right. That's like I said, this is outdated. We kind of seen a lot of these things, but would be like, put short-term rental in the title.
Just so that it's completely clear.
Because when you get to here, you're going to have accessory vacation rental, short-term rental, or it should be accessory vacation, short-term rental.
Correct.
I think that would be more consistent. Yeah.
Yeah. Sounds good.
That's all.
Good idea. Okay.
Easy to do.
We're on the same
Do we
page.
need-
Yay.
Do we need the term vacation at all? Is that in there for a reason?
No, we don't need that in there.
True.
It could be just seasonal short-term rental, accessory short-term rental, and commercial short-term rental.
Okay.
Okay.
Point taken.
Got it.
Yeah. They might not all be vacationers.
Right.
That's right.
True.
Yeah, I think vacation rental, it makes it a little bit confusing.
Good. Okay. Perfect. All right.
Anyone else from the board on this? I don't have any. I can't see anybody's hands, so I have to rely on you to speak up. Go ahead, John.
I'm not sure if I'd miss my opportunity to comment if I don't do it now, but I thought that as a board, we'd be of value to the select board and the broader discussion if at some point we do have deliberation over the number of licenses that are
Oh,
gonna
yeah.
be issued and the expiration dates.
Yeah.
So I'm just
Yeah,
hoping.
that is for another date, but yeah, we're just trying to get this. What we're relying on right now, John, is um the disparity of the data that we have. And
Okay.
Jeremy gave the range, 210 to 400 or something like that. It'd be good to have data, but if the number is closer to 210, then anybody, then our cap numbers wouldn't be that offensive, right? So, the ones that we've bandied about. So, but yeah, that discussion is still pending, and you won't lose your chance to chime in on that.
Thank you.
Right.
Excuse me. Anyone else on the board, just on the definitions and that sort of thing? Thanks a lot, Shenley, for your work on this.
Yeah. And then that's it. And then we just, other stuff is not housekeeping, but we just added it all in. We have to make sure ADU is going to be in the code throughout and be consistent. And we can't limit parking. We can't require parking for accessory dwelling units. That was a state hand down. So they're exempt from any off-street parking requirements. So we just got to look at the code, but that's pretty much it for just 290.
Yeah. Okay.
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 Yeah, but I see a comment from Eric Johansson. Yeah, we haven't promised, I don't think, that we're going to give you data that you're specifically asking for, because we've been trying to get that data and it's not readily available, given that the short-term rental regulations are often fairly new. However, we have posted, I believe,
We have not posted it yet, Ethan.
Oh, you haven't? Okay.
No,
That will be
there's
forthcoming.
been a lot going on in the last week, and I know we
Yeah,
said it
no, that's fine.
2 weeks
That's
ago we
fine.
would,
No.
but it'll get there.
Yeah. Okay, so that just to address that specific thing, there is a collection of studies and articles on the effect of short-term rentals on available and affordable housing, and those will be posted into the packet when they go up this week. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
No more comments though on the short-term rentals. We really have to move on now to the to the peers, or we're not going to get it done. Shenley, are you all set?
Good. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank
Got
you.
it. Yes.
So you can go ahead and unshare your screen, and we can get back to seeing everybody's beautiful faces.
I thought I did. Did I unshare?
You did.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
you did.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yep.
Thank you.
I was looking over at a different. Yeah. Okay. So let's see. You may be able to tell my throat is a little gravelly, and I'm dealing with a little bit of that. So I have asked Chriso and Jeremy to sort of take the lead on the peer discussion, and they have graciously obliged. So I'm going to silence myself and spare you all, and allow Jeremy to jump in now on what's going on with the peers. He's going to lead us into the discussion, and then Chriso is going to help us go through the criteria that we're looking at. Okay. Is Jeremy frozen?
Looks like it.
Either that or he's got a really
Oh,
itchy
there he is.
nose.
There he is. Yeah, I was gonna say he didn't like my suggestion.
He's still
Jeremy,
frozen.
can you hear
Still a
us?
little,
I think he's in limbo.
still a little.
Okay. Jeremy, I'll do a little bit here at the beginning,
Me too.
while we wait for Jeremy to get in here. But Jeremy submitted a memo for the peer discussion, and if you recall, a lot of this was based on the idea that with the peers, I think you all are aware on the planning board side that we can't just do an outright ban. It's been pretty much discussed that that's not an option. And so what we're looking at then is looks like Jeremy bounced and recorded. It's not recording anymore, so we'll wait for him to collect. Shenley, can you text Jeremy or something and see what's
he's
going on
back.
with him?
I'm here.
Oh, he is?
Yeah.
Oh,
Back
you've
here.
been gone. You
I
weren't
know
here
it.
for a while.
I know. I don't know what happened. I'm sorry.
You were in my top left, and now you're not on my main screen. So
Probably better that way.
Okay. So, I was just saying that you had submitted a memo, that gave us sort of a guideline and that you were going to sort of, lead us into this discussion, and then Krista would take over.
Sure. All right. All right. Yeah, so the select board, just I think briefly, the select board last Tuesday extended the moratorium for another 180 days. And to be honest, it probably couldn't happen on a more appropriate day, which was
Who knew?
right the day
That night.
before. Yeah, that night. Yeah, it's horrible. And so yeah, so they extended the moratorium, and we're moving forward now with you folks. The select board kind of wants this to the voters in June. That is my hope, and I said absolutely last Tuesday, absolutely for June. It is still my hope, absolutely for June. But I think things are very different than they were last Tuesday. I think everyone can probably acknowledge that. Regardless of where you may stand on this issue. It's been a significant, we saw significant damage last week's storm, both of those storms. And the criteria, I think it's important that we kind of continue along the path of the criteria that the issues that the Harbor Committee identified and the moratorium identified. Those issues were, their concerns were density of piers in the harbor, habitat concerns or issues, public access, and climate and sea level rise. And those were the issues identified in the moratorium. And the Harbor Committee kind of narrowed it down to those four, which makes sense. And I think you guys know that you've reviewed their report before. The moratorium I can go over. The concerns in that moratorium were possible adverse impacts to the intertidal zone and ecosystem, may adversely affect small recreational boating and access to a substantial degree, interfere with public access to and use of the intertidal zone and harbor waters. Sea level rise is a significant threat to the harbor, the shoreline, and structures such as piers, docks, floats, and ramps, and that piers and these structures could pose serious harm to the public, natural environment, abutting properties, mooring placement, recreational boaters, and public access, may overburden public services such as mooring placement and access, and that our existing ordinances do not adequately address impacts and significance of sea level rise on these structures. So what I sent to you and is included in the packet, select board packet, or planning board packet, sorry, were a bunch of documents, a bunch of information, I think a lot of good information and some maps. And I sent a memo out today to you folks, kind of looking at the habitat piece, the public access piece, climate change and sea level rise and density, and kind of took those documents and stuck them into what I think they fall under in those four categories. There's a lot there, a lot of information. And by no means is that like all of the information is out there, right? There's a ton of information on this stuff. Finding it and getting experts to provide some assistance on this, I think is important. In particular, I think maybe, Ethan, I'm going to go to share my screen and I'm going to start maybe with the habitat piece because that's the first in my memo. And I'm going to share my screen and go to maps. Do you guys see my screen?
Yep.
I'm going to see if I can find the other map. That's the co-occurrence map. That's the sand dune map. There's the eelgrass map, but let me get to, there's the coastal bluff map. And this is the significant wildlife habitat map, which I think is really important and critical to look at. I did send, I just want to share for people that are maybe listening, I shared information from a lot of sources, NOAA, and a bunch of researchers. I looked at habitat impacts of piers, pile driving impacts on fish, provided that information to you. I will say that not all of the piers that get constructed use pilings. Most of the ones that I know that we've permitted recently are using crib work, granite crib work. But I think there's the opportunity for pile driving, and there's impacts on fish. Shared that with you. And then some eelgrass mooring information that came from DMR. I shared that with you. And when we look at the eelgrass maps, you can identify where eelgrass is in Camden, and the significant wildlife habitat map. We also included Chapter 310 of NERPA, which are their standards for reviewing of DEP permits, and the Army Corps main general permit information and their review criteria, which is all stuff that we can use and add to our review criteria. I'm going to see if I can zoom this in a little bit. Maybe I can't. Let's see. Yes, of course I can. You got to move this screen now.
Oh, at the bottom right, Jeremy, that plus sign.
Oh, I know. I've got something in my way though.
Oh,
Yeah. Sometimes there's too many screens or too much stuff on my screen. All right. So these are the areas in Camden where there's significant wildlife habitat on the coast. And generally this is waterfowl and wading bird habitat or nesting habitat for waterfowl. And I'm working to get an expert in to talk to you about that. And so we have an area here at Sherman's Cove. I would add that Sherman's Cove is already, we have a prohibition on piers in Sherman's Cove. That's that area. It's interesting, it kind of comes over and picks up the area where the Rixon Piers is too. So this might have been helpful. Then we've got an area going down out towards, this is the old Cawley property, if you can see my cursor, down here at the town of Rockport town line. Maine Coast Heritage Trust, their farm is here. That's it. And, just down from the cemetery, there's significant wildlife habitat there. And then as we go up the coast, here, this would be Springbrook. Springbrook stream runs in where DOT is doing the new bridge project there to replace that culvert. And then up near Nordhaven is right there too. But that whole, I point Nordhaven out just because that's, you guys were recently reviewed project in this area. That whole stretch of Camden Harbor or the coastal harbor right there is significant wildlife habitat. And I think these areas deserve special treatment and special review. Now we are looking at what are the abilities to, you guys had talked about prohibition. I'm not necessarily going down that road, but can we possibly limit piers in areas of significant wildlife habitat? And the answer is probably yes, but we need good information on the impacts or effects of a structure like a pier in a location like that. That said, these locations don't have any piers currently, so it would definitely be a new impact. So I am, again, looking to bring in some experts to talk to you folks on impacts on habitats, in addition to the information I provided you. And that's for the reason of, if you come up with a regulation, you've got to have good testimony and good evidence to direct kind of guide you to that place that says, yeah, we shouldn't have any. For instance, we shouldn't have piers located in significant wildlife habitats at all. We don't allow them in Sherman's Cove. I assume that's because of significant wildlife habitat. I also assume it's probably because of water levels there. But those are two locations, well, 3 locations if you include the area down by the Cawley Pier. That's significant wildlife habitat. Do you guys have any questions on that? think this is important information. You haven't seen it probably before. So I wanted to get you guys as much info as possible. I can go on to the next map if you'd like.
Sure.
All right. I'm going to let someone into the waiting room too, or into the meeting. Coastal bluffs. Coastal bluffs are regulated by DEP. They're also regulated, have an increased regulation under shoreland zoning. We have coastal bluffs in Camden. The green areas are, I'm not sure I can read this on my screen. Let me see if I can enlargen this up. Yeah, very hard for me to read on my screen.
Me
Was
too.
it-
Oh.
Can you guys read it? But we have things in Camden, and along the coast, bluffs that are unstable, highly unstable, not unstable. So, the red are highly unstable bluffs. Interesting here, this part in Sherman's Cove, and I don't really want to focus a whole lot there because we don't allow piers there anyway. But I was at a property over in this area, looking at following the storm, and I was like, I wonder if this is a highly unstable bluff. Weird spot for it over there off of Sherman's Point and Water's Edge, but yeah, it's a highly unstable bluff there. And then you go up the coast a little more, and then you've got the yellow is a level not as high as the red, highly unstable. And I bring this up because I think it's important to, when you are reviewing or proposing, proposing, constructing, and reviewing here in these locations, these are highly unstable bluffs. And as you can see in the pictures here, this is what they look like. And they oftentimes, they slump and they slump and they slump. Chunks of land fall in. Clint, the code officer, went out to a location up off of Springbrook, up north on Route 1 yesterday, looking at some damage. Someone called and asked how they can address some of the damage, and he was going out there, and I said, I wonder if that's one of the unstable bluff areas, and it certainly was. And you had a massive landslide of 30 feet of material, and 30 feet of coastline height and depth actually lost into the ocean from someone's property. So those are probably not great locations to do piers, to construct them. And I think it's also important to think about when people do piers, they are also armoring that shoreline. And what we have seen, and I think I'm going to bring someone else in, Pete Slavinsky from the Maine Geological Survey, to talk with you hopefully next time we meet. What we've seen when you armor shoreline, how does that impact the rest of the shoreline? And you can see pretty significant negative impacts of armoring shore lines on the adjacent properties. The water, the ocean, and the waves kind of hit that riprap armor, and it picks up force as it's moving down that armored wall, if you will. It's not a vertical wall, but it's a 2-to-1 slope sometimes. And then it blows out the property next to them. So that's something to keep in mind. Any questions on coastal bluffs? And Pete Slavinsky, again, he's going to come in next week, hopefully in 2 weeks, hopefully, and chat with you about these kind of issues and impacts of sea level rise on coastal bluffs, on sensitive dune areas, and on infrastructure as best as he can. Any questions on this? Are you all still there?
Yep.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. I did my homework.
I know. I'm sure you did. And then we got eelgrass. Eelgrass is a sensitive ocean plant. And we have some areas. It's clear that the area around Springbrook is pretty special, because not only do we have and sensitive, we do have eelgrass here. We've got a big swath of significant wildlife habitat. And then we have unstable bluffs also in this area. So it's a pretty pretty
And
sensitive.
dunes, I think, as well.
And yeah, I'm not there yet. Getting there.
I'm just,
You did your homework.
I'm reading ahead.
Yeah. And then eelgrass again. There's the other locations of eelgrass around. Right outside of Dillingham Point. You can see outside right off of Lyman Morris too is a big swath of eelgrass, and they are well aware of that eelgrass. I know that when they've talked about their project, their potential project in the future, their marina project that they've again talked about, they've talked about having to work around and deal with the eelgrass issue. But then again, we have big swath of eelgrass over along Dillingham Point and around Curtis Island. So and a little bit down the coast on towards Rockport again, over by the Colley property. That's a little further down. It's into Rockport, but that's
Jeremy,
Yeah.
in your materials, and it might have been a discussion of the eelgrass, it showed that moorings can also have a negative impact on eelgrass.
Yep.
Kind of little
Yeah.
circles where the chain will take out the eelgrass, but
Yep.
Yeah.
So-
No, that's a good point. And I am trying to get someone from DMR and DEP experts on eelgrass to come in and chat with you about
Well,
these things.
it can be more than the chains. It can be light impact from shadow.
Yep.
So like larger moored boats, a larger float that's over eelgrass can also have
Yeah.
impact.
Yep.
Yeah. So in the relative value of eelgrass versus the other variables that go into designating an area of significant environmental value, I'd like to know where eelgrass falls, I guess.
Yeah. And again, this is all good stuff, and this is why I'm gonna bring in some
Yeah,
folks in the chat.
eelgrass is pretty significant.
It is, no doubt. And I don't understand it all. It's not what I do, but we're gonna get some folks to chat with you about that. And then sand dunes. The state's got some new rulemaking on sand dunes underway. We have 3 locations of sand dunes in Camden. Hard to believe, but we do. And those areas would be down along in around Sherman's Cove again. And then up along oh, it's a little slow, I'm sorry. This would be Springbrook again. That there's some sand dunes there as well. The guy and Pete Slavinsky from the Maine Geological Survey, he's the one who developed these maps and has worked on the rulemaking. He can have a good conversation with you on that when he's in here. That's what I have on habitat. These are all, again, what Shenley and I are probably going to do is take the Army Corps' 2020 to 2025 general permit information that you've been provided with, along with the DEP's Chapter 310 and some other communities standards when it's looking at habitat, and try to roll those into some evaluation criteria or approval criteria for you, is our plan. We want to make sure we're doing it the right way and an appropriate way. So that's why, again, I'm going to bring some folks in to chat with experts on this. So you're not just pulling this out of your hat that we should do this. It's important to have legitimate reasons for regulating in certain areas. And going to public access, the next item, if you want to do it this way, Ethan, and then we can chat, or Chriso, since you're leading this discussion. Ethan, keep your mic off. Hold your voice.
Yeah, I think just working through, I mean, I don't know that we're going to have any definite recommendations or thoughts out of tonight, but just to sort of get through where we're heading.
Yep. Okay, that sounds good.
Mhm.
So I'll keep going then.
What is the Cumberland Pier under access? Just to double check myself here.
Yeah, that's where we are. And the Cumberlands,
Jeremy, sorry, did you see Stephanie's question about the date of the map?
no.
Yeah,
I
she
think
just asked
Henry
about, I'm not
responded.
sure which map she was talking about at that moment.
I
It
think
was it was the bluffs.
The
And-
bluffs?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It says the data was collected back in 1995 for the field work.
Hmm.
And it looks like it may have a 2000.
I think I read that map was printed, that document was made in 2002 based on
2002, right,
95 data. So
right.
So this
I'm-
Pete Slavinsky will be a good one to chat with.
Yeah.
I will say the DEP, the state really hasn't focused a lot of attention on these unstable bluffs until the last 15 years. Shoreline zoning regulations got ramped up around coastal bluffs to increase setbacks and those things from those areas because, again, like that one up on that Clint saw up off Route 1, they lost a 30-foot tall, in height bank, 30 feet deep of material went into the ocean. I mean, it's a massive. I mean,
it's pretty safe to assume that that none of the bluffs are getting better. Like if they're in yellow, they're probably
On their way
moving
to red.
orange to red rather than the other way. So
yeah.
Good
Yeah,
point.
so we'll have Pete Slavinsky. He's an expert in the state
Yeah.
of these, and he'll be able to chat and provide some good information to you to make some good decisions. So keeping going on public access, if that's all right. You good,
Yep.
Steph? Yeah, okay, good. John, the Cumberland, public access is a piece that was identified in the moratorium, like we know. You guys had talked about it. Cumberland has a provision that requires piers, if they're going to be constructed, that it prohibits the blocking of traditional fishing, fouling, and navigating. So those are rights, colonial rights. It actually, in their language, speaks to colonial rights that are protected. And a pier shall not violate those rights of individuals to fish, foul, and navigate. So what they require is they require piers to be elevated in such a way in that area to provide access underneath it for people to walk under it. If that's not possible, then it requires people to construct their piers with stair access so people navigating in those tidal flats to walk up and over their pier to get to the other side. And that's something that we could probably require currently, like in the review, not you guys, because it's not one of your standards, but the select board and the harbor committee could probably require something like that because that is in one of their standards.
Yeah.
So I think they could probably require it, but I think making it an absolute requirement in the ordinance is better than kind of at the whim of who's ever on the select board at the time or whoever's on the harbor committee at the time might say, we don't care about public access on this one, but making it a requirement of all of them I think is the appropriate way to go. That's all I have on public access, if that's okay.
Pushing back just a little bit.
Okay.
The downside of that, and thanks for your comment. I was wondering if Cumberland was a particular style of pier construction.
Oh, I get it.
But I'd be interested in seeing how much more of an aesthetic impact having a set of usable stairs on both sides of a pier would end up being. So I'm not 100% in.
I can touch a little bit on that, John. I've dealt with this a few times in different towns. There are a number of little ways that you can get around it. It can be, it doesn't have to be ADA compliant, depending on, so it can be a few stone steps and a ladder step, or, some of the homeowners don't like it because they have concerns about liability of the public. But it is the public land. So, there are definitely ways. It's actually something that a lot of piers get built with steps for the property owner to use to get down to their beach. So it's a pretty easy way to do.
Yeah, as long as it would be hard on the shore and not out in the intertidal zone, I'd be more comfortable with it.
Yeah, I mean that's usually how they get done so that they're not exposed to, because the idea is that you're doing something that gives access around or over the pier at high tide. Because
Yeah.
at low tide you could walk under it. At high tide you want something that when you're walking in that area you can get over a pier.
Thank you.
Right, and the key is the preservation of the rights of fouling and fishing. But when we get to the discussion as a board on the aesthetics, that's going to be a huge issue, John. Right, so even like saying raising these piers up another 5 feet or whatever might be an aesthetic concern. So we'll get to all of those discussions, but I too agree that I would, if it was out in the middle, of the beach area or whatever at medium tide or whatever, that wouldn't make much sense. But if it's sort of on the shore, it's a little less impact.
Yeah.
Okay. That's all I have. And then, so climate change, sea level rise, I think that's the big one for me right now. Obviously, we had 7 piers. So if you don't know, we had 7 piers in Camden Harbor that got destroyed, damaged, or are gone, completely. Some of them gone completely. I walked over and looked at the Rixon Pier. That pier was constructed, a year and a half ago. It's gone. Gone. And then even if you look up there, I don't have pictures. Shenley's got some pictures I think she can pull up of where these piers went and
Yeah.
where a lot of this infrastructure. And when I say the piers went, there are pier sections, right? Sections of piers. But there's wood, wiring, conduit, light fixtures, everything that you can imagine, pieces and parts of, are sitting in Sherman's Cove in that significant wildlife habitat. Quite a process to clean it up. Proc was over there today. I think they started today or yesterday, trying to clean up and salvage as much of the pier material that they can. They worked with the property owner involved over there to get access. Not an easy thing to do, and it's a wetland. Not an easy thing to do, but there's a ton of material over there. So Shenley, I don't know if you want to share the pictures if you can that you had earlier.
Let's see here.
So there's one.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Give me
That's
a
our
second.
emergency public information that we had to send to the FEMA.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we've all seen.
All right, there you go. That's a good shot, Shenley.
This one.
Uh-oh. What's she doing?
Can you see it? This one?
No, the one,
No.
the second.
Yeah,
ago.
I think we
mind.
all probably saw photos.
Sorry, I think I'll pass it on to you all. I think Allison wanted the plan board to have that. She had wanted me to.
Yeah,
us
I
to
mean,
pass
I
it
think
on.
probably several of us walked down and have looked ourselves and seen.
All right, perfect.
Okay, let me.
So I think this is. You can stop sharing, Shenley.
I'm trying.
All right, I know it's hard sometimes.
My things like went crazy. Okay, sorry about that. Oops.
Better than freezing, like mine did. So this is a big one, like we sent to voters last year the are you trying to stop sharing, Shenley?
Yeah, there it is.
There we go.
Sorry.
Sent to voters changes to allow the pier walking platform, right? The walking surface to go from a max height of 6 feet to go to 8 feet above mean high water. None of these were built to that, right? But none of these at even 8 feet above mean high water would have survived, likely. I've talked to engineers about this. And so one thing we can look at is raising that even higher. And I think like Chriso or Ethan said, you get into aesthetic piece when you start raising them even higher. But at the same time, if we have to allow them in certain locations, you want to allow them so that they don't do what they all did, and all of them are in Sherman's Cove. I would also add that all of them were in the high velocity zone. This is a velocity zone, the VE zone, and the FEMA flood maps for the town. The entire outer harbor and the entire coastal harbor from Rockport up to Lincolnville are in high velocity zones. So it's just not floodwaters; it's actually wave action and wind that FEMA's looking at. And so again, it's not just the coastal; it's the entire outer harbor from the yacht club over to Lyman Morse into Sherman's Cove all the way out to beyond to Curtis Island is all velocity zone. Those piers were all constructed supposedly to the standards required under FEMA requirements for structures in the velocity zone. Those requirements under our code say that they need to be designed by a professional engineer. That's all it speaks to. The engineer then is required to then use FEMA manuals on constructing structures in the structures like a pier in a velocity zone. It's clear to me, based on everything that's happened, none of those piers survived. So I'm not sure that the standards that they have are adequate. I'm not sure what standard would be adequate. I'm not a professional engineer. I don't know how that would work. What I've been told caused the failures to these piers is that the piers themselves weren't high enough, elevated out of the water enough. So they became, in essence, buoyant. And when the ocean was doing what it was doing, they became buoyant. And then that's what ripped them off. I don't know if that's the case. I mean, I don't doubt that's the case, but I mean, for that to happen, you had to have a failure of hardware too. It's just not that these things are floating, sitting on, right? They're not sitting on granite crib work. They're pinned to granite crib work. So it's not just that they became buoyant and floated away. It's that hardware also failed. And can you construct something that can withstand Mother Earth's mass power? I don't know. But certainly what we have, current standards don't address this stuff. So I am thinking about this in a lot of ways. DEP, as I understand, is in the southern part of the state, is trying to look at that mean high water. Mean high water is a number that comes. I don't know if I think EPA or I think Army Corps comes up with mean high water. I don't know that off the top of my head, but it's kind of it was created many years ago. Mean high water level is. Maybe it's USGS makes that, I don't know, but it was a long time ago, and that has changed. Like the actual what's on the face of the earth mean high water is different than the regulatory mean high water. So do we need to use a different number, or do we say mean high water plus 3 feet, or mean high water plus 4 feet, which is 50 level sea level rise?
Right.
I don't know, but those are some things that we're looking at. We're going to try to get more information and data on. I think I did, just so you know, I did speak with some folks on the insurance end on piers and water related.
Jeremy, just real quick before you jump in on that, can I ask? I think I know this, but even mean high water doesn't include storm surge.
Correct.
Right.
Right.
And so astronomical high tides.
Right.
Which is what really caused this incident. And so if we're looking at sea level rise plus the potential for more astronomical high tides and storm surge, we're really talking about a significant number, more than 4 feet.
Probably.
Right. I mean, this is no longer a 100-year event. It's an every year event. I mean, it seems like, and I don't have the data to back that up, but
No,
um,
the recorded record-setting high tide in Portland on Saturday was 14.8, which was 2 feet above the predicted astronomical tide, which was like 5 feet above so-called mean. But the problem is that mean high tide doesn't mean anything anymore.
Right.
And then you have the greater extremes. So we're looking at a set of numbers that are way over, we're not talking, the whole point is it's not 2 or 3 feet, it's 5 or 6.
at least, yeah.
Yeah.
Just wanted to get that on. Go ahead, Jeremy, with the
I-
insurance issue.
No, I think that's a great point. So yeah, all that's good stuff. And I do think Pete Slavinsky will be a good help on that. He's really got a good grasp on water levels and storm surge and sea level.
Yeah.
It's all impacting. And on top of it, like I've listened to him talk before, the sea level rise here along the coast is actually different than other places based on the currents that are happening.
Right.
So there's a whole host of
Right. And
factors.
what storm systems are, Wednesday was worse than Saturday in some ways because it was southerly winds that
Right.
created more surge.
Yep.
The other thing I will just say on the piers, there are places, and I haven't ever really looked at it when we've looked at these applications, but I know that the DEP will come in and say that they won't allow some people to do granite crib work. They will insist on pilings because of water flowing. Because a pier on pilings with cross chains, water goes through it rather than hitting on the granite, which causes more wave lifting on that float.
Yeah.
So we don't really say anything about construction method.
Right. No. Yeah.
We have
That's a really good point.
We just rely on DEP for that and assume that they've gone in and said, and the aesthetic preference is a lot of people prefer to have a nice traditional looking granite pier. And yes, they're pinned, but it's typically one pin that's 3/4 of an inch to an inch hole between into that granite. So our somewhere that we could look at what construction gets done, because if you look at the one that just got approved, which it's brand new, it's built by Proc Marine, one of the best marine construction companies in the Northeast, who've built more, and it's not just that the wooden structure is gone, those granite blocks have moved.
Right.
Like the granite blocks underneath got moved away from it, and they're pinned into each other. So that's something I think
That's
that we should
interesting, because that was a question that I had, Chris. So the blocks actually are moving
on one of those piers on that one on Harbor Way. You can see they're sort of not at 90. They're not parallel. They're kind of.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Yep. It's a good point. I noticed the same thing, and there's a place that I go regularly on the coast here, and very large Volkswagen old bug size rocks, that 2 of them are now in a totally different location than they were a week ago. So we're seeing the force of that ocean is so intense, and the scour that can happen. And I don't know how they, where they decide to put these granite on, or how they probably don't pin it to ledge. They probably set it on the ocean bottom. But the scour that can happen around the granite as well, the base one, concerns me. So these are all.
I mean, I can just say from personal experience, having gone through this a couple years ago, the bottom granite was pinned into ledge, but then they put some broken up pieces of rock around that bottom piece of granite, so that if there was wave action at low tide, it wasn't just hitting on that first piece of granite. I mean, this is another thing. If some of these storms happen at low tide, it's an entirely different scenario in there that we haven't even, we're just talking about
Right.
high tides, but don't keep in mind, we're also seeing extreme lows,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and that, so if those, you know, which, if all that stuff, all that storm action comes through and hits the base of a pier, that's a whole nother
Right.
kettle of wax.
Yep. But I think it's a good segue into the construction methods and performance standards for them, and I certainly think we need to look at them to make sure that if you're going to build one, you're going to build in such a way. I'd add, okay, before I go there, insurance piece. I think it's important for everyone to know that these residential piers and structures you can't insure those, and so they just have liability insurance on them, hopefully, but they don't have insurance products for these residential piers. And I just bring that up. I think it's important. I mean, and granted the liability piece, you know, they can cover, people can go after them for when they fail and they say they hit the pier next door, or they damaged my property in such a way, or they hit a yacht, $1 million yacht that's, you know, anchored and hunkered down in the harbor, and now all of a sudden the pier hammers it. But I don't know how you prove those things either. Like, how do you prove that Pier A, this pier that we see in Sherman's Cove now, during the storm in the middle of the night, how do you know that one was the one that did it, as opposed to the other one that's in Sherman's Cove,
Right.
or the other one that's now on the other side of Vinyl Haven or whatever? You know, how do you prove that? But I think maintenance of these piers, and this gets me to this piece on maintenance of piers. There's Shenley and I found some FEMA documents on in their hurricane and flood mitigation handbook for public facilities, but I think it goes great over to residential facilities on what's required on how to deal with piers and maintain them in severe weather, coastal weather areas. And if you go through this manual, it talks about, this handbook talks about maintenance programs and retrofitting them, elevating them. We dealt with the elevating piece, but we've never talked about a maintenance program required for piers, or we've never talked about this retrofit or reinforce it. If yours was constructed in 1978, it may still be constructed the same way it was then. So I think these are some things that we should look at when we're talking about performance standards and construction standards. Go ahead,
And
Christo.
on some of that, well, just two things. As an example, I know the bulkhead in Rockport Harbor, large sections of it came adrift, and when we looked at the pins that were holding some of the granite together, have been there for decades, and those pins are totally corroded and rusted away.
Right. And so if we're going to allow these, I think we definitely need to come up with performance standards that make someone provide to the town on a certain period every so many years. You've got,
well, I mean,
proper
look, we require, I would say we require people to have their moorings inspected every year or every other year. I mean, and that's a steel pin into a, you know, into a granite block.
Right.
So these things that are underwater, you know, they should be inspected at a minimum on a 2-year basis, if not every year.
Yeah, it's harder. The other piece that I keep thinking about is these storms that we've had the last few. We've been incredibly lucky in some ways because they were in the winter. And you know, if one of these storms comes through in August, you know, I mean, the hurricane came through last year, and the towns. Well, I keep getting bugged. I keep getting some buggy internet, but you know, the towns and the marinas did an incredible job getting boats out of the water last fall, but all of those floats and ramps were still attached. And so that's one more piece of debris that's, you know, going to float around, and we don't have anything about when do floats have to come out, how are they maintained, all of that side of things.
related to that question, Jeremy, you had talked about as an aftermath of this past storm, that there's conduit and light fixtures and wood and what have you. And who's responsible for cleaning that up? The debris.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, I think it's going to be a community effort to clean it up, to be honest with you, some of that stuff. I mean, I will say, like, Karen Brace, she's at 24 Harbor Road. This would be the pier next to the Rixons that got destroyed. She called me I mean, as soon as her pier failed, like, she called me the next morning. I mean, just petrified that what happened to all the piers, but just really, horrified that her pier is now sitting in Sherman's Cove in a significant wildlife habitat. And she immediately called Proc. She's able to determine which one is hers, and she's being proactive, which we really appreciate. So she got Proc over there, and Proc's there because she called that day, that the very next day. So they're taking care of those larger structures, but all this conduit, all this small, other wiring and lighting and all, wood's one thing, I guess, but all that other stuff is really significant, especially if we get another storm and some of it gets pulled out. I mean, so I think it's going to take a community effort to try to deal with it. I don't know. We've got I mentioned, working with, local school, watershed school or something, or the high school to
Right.
get together a group of people to go over, kids to go over and do some community service and try to remove some of that stuff at some point.
Right. And just to jump in to give a direct answer, John, it's the pier owner is responsible to the extent that you can identify the pier and the conduit and everything else, which of course gets into the messy part. And that's why Jeremy's talking about it's really comes down to a community effort, because what conduit that's floating around in Sherman's Cove is dedicated to what pier, to the extent that that can be identified. As Jeremy said, the larger pieces, if you can, like this one landowner that he said that owned a pier, she was able to identify her pier and took responsibility because she is responsible, and that's great that she was proactive, but she is responsible, as are the other pier owners. And if somebody's got a pier that's floating over in Vinyl Haven, they're still responsible for it.
Yeah, true.
Not that it would easily be tied back to them. I'm not saying that it's easy, but from the basic precept of who's responsible, it is the pier owner.
So do they get charged for any of this work that has to be done?
Charged by
Monetarily?
fined or penalized by the
Well,
town?
no, this pier owner who went and had them go show up, Brock, you said, or whatever, to get her pier out of Sherman's Cove, she's paying for that out of her pocket.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
And she's doing that, and she's doing it responsibly. That's, as Jeremy said, we appreciate it. But there's 5 other piers floating around that also need to be dealt with and identified. And if it can be identified to a specific pier, that would be going back to that owner.
Yeah, I mean, my gut says, and I haven't been over there, and I didn't see all the work that Proc's done today, but my gut says is they're pulling all the piers out of there, and salvaging them all. And I'm certain they're probably picking up large stuff too when they're there. I mean, I would assume Proc's doing that. But yeah, it's a struggle for sure. But I do think maintenance requirements are critical to this moving forward. And a maintenance schedule and construction standards that are ramped up. And maybe you can't put one in a velocity zone if you can't prove certain, you meet certain requirements, or you're going to do it in a certain way. I've taught there's other ways to do it. I think it's hard. I thought about surety bonds or impact fees, things like that, in talking with bond people and insurance folks. It appears that surety bonds like that aren't in the residential market. Like, you can't get them residentially. So, that's probably not a good way to go, but is there a way to do impact fees that go to a dedicated account? Is there, I did a new fee.
Or
Go ahead.
Or you have a dinghy haul out system and no pier, or you use the yacht club or the Lyman Morris.
Right.
Right. I mean, that's another
Yeah.
option.
It is an option. So I was just talking about fees a second ago. I did take to the select board a new fee schedule for the town, and I wasn't thinking piers beyond the scope of like what we do for permitting them, like the permit that's issued and the fee associated with it. But it might be a place to add a new fee beyond just the standard building permit fee, a new fee for a pier that goes in. I mean, these piers cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. They're not insured, they're not insurable, so these are likely coming out of the pocket, cash out of someone's pocket. And repairing them is going to be cash out of someone's pocket. I assume they can pay some impact fees for situations like this. I mean, I can't fathom if one of these large piers hit a boat or took out some of our infrastructure. And, you know, granted their liability insurance would cover it to a certain extent, but I think everybody needs to be made whole, and there's an impact on the environment. And that, I mean, again, we don't have a lot of significant wildlife habitat in Camden's harbor and along its coast. We got those handful of areas. If everything ends up in Sherman's Cove in a significant wildlife habitat, maybe people should be paying impact fees for that type of impact, and I think that's doable.
And we're sure that these people have liability insurance.
We're not sure necessarily. I mean, I think that's a requirement that we would do too, is require that you have liability insurance on them. It's normally within their homeowner's policy, but maybe some of these people don't have homeowner's policy that covers that.
Yeah, the chances of them not having a homeowner's policy are pretty slim.
Pretty slim.
So yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
it would be
but
pretty. If you have several million dollar home, you're likely going to have. But you're right, there may not be coverage on these piers at all.
yeah, there are
There's no guarantee.
There's
Yeah.
exclusions, and
Yeah, if there's an
if this is one of them. Yeah.
Right. So absolutely, that would have to be a requirement, right? If we were allowing any piers, that there would be some sort of policy that covers any liability.
Yep. So I am looking at, I reached out to the state on the velocity zone. If any community has prohibited piers and structures like this in the velocity zone, not to their knowledge is what I've been told. Doesn't mean we can't do it. But it is the entire outer harbor and the coastal harbor of Camden, except the inner harbor, which doesn't have a prohibition on piers right now. So, well, it does. It has you can't do more residential piers in the inner harbor.
Can I just ask a question? I don't know if the board, if you're also on your email, but have you seen the pictures that Allison submitted?
I sent the email. I just
I know.
forwarded you all.
I saw it, Sandy. I
Okay.
know, and
Okay.
I'm telling you, it shines the light on this when you're thinking about Sherman's Cove and
Well, yeah.
the nature. These are not just giant pieces of pier that are being picked up. You've got just stuff strewn everywhere in a sensitive habitat area.
I will just
the
point out that
liability question is not something that's easily handled. How do you ascertain liability for this kind of cleanup and damage? It's almost impossible.
Well, and I will also point out that, I mean, we know that there's a ton of stuff from those piers in those parts of the harbor, but I'll tell you, go anywhere on the coast right now, there is so much trash of all kinds from all over the coast. Who knows where some of it's from, and some of that's causing damage. I mean, so that's, I mean, there's a whole other that we can't attribute. But what I was going to say, in those storm surge areas, if we can't ban them outright, you know, going back to the construction methods and really tightening up how they're built in those areas might be an option. I'm having really bad internet problems, just FYI. I may have to do something here.
Okay, you seem okay now. You did disappear for
a
bit,
but I've lost you guys 4 or 5 times now. So
okay, all right. Well, I'll bring my gravelly voice back if it comes to that. But I will say, just to address your thing, yes, the coastline is littered with debris from everything, but these pictures show very clearly
Oh,
pier debris.
I was down there the day after the storm. I mean,
Yeah,
where
yeah.
you
That's
could
why
see
you were my point person on this.
you could see several of them floating in the harbor at that point still. I mean, you could, it's no, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it's when you get you can attribute some of it to point location, but not all of it.
Mhm.
Right.
Next piece is on density. And that I see that as really an aesthetics piece. And I did provide you with the NOAA's. NOAA has a document on visual impacts of structures like this. And then I provided you with the Natural Resources Protection Act, their visual impacts as well, standard. I would say that whenever you look at all of these standards, it's like Army Corps has these standards, DEP has these standards, and everyone meets all the standards, right? Like they permit these things all the time. It doesn't mean you guys have to. If you use the same standard, you have this. You can make your own findings and facts of.
And they didn't in Uliano, right?
Correct.
And so and the court upheld those standards, and
Yep.
one of the challenges to that was that it was too vague. But the standards, again, that's something that can be written in.
Right. And I think now, especially in light of what's happened from, again, this is from Kittery to Lubec. The entire coast of Maine was hammered by this. I mean, I think this is an unprecedented chance to address this issue kind of holistically and in a big way in Camden. I think everyone that I've spoke to is just appalled about what happened to the piers, where they ended up. Can't you do something about it? I've heard that every day from people. So ramping this up, limiting or prohibiting them in certain areas, ramping up construction standards, and in such a way that if you're going to be able to get one, you're gonna build in such a way that and I don't know how you get there, but it we may have to bring in some significant marine engineers and just not, it might be beyond, regular civil engineers. It might be marine engineers, and I'm not poo-pooing any civil engineer that we work with. They're all professionals. They're all, good engineers, but maybe we need to have marine engineers look at these things and design such structures. So these are the things we're working on. It's not this is tough. And I said earlier, the select board wanted something to voters in June. That's my hope. But this is it's a big lift, because I think everyone sees what happened with these storms. And again, it's not just one, it's not two, it's really three, going back to last December. So it is going to take a lot, and we may have to piecemeal some of this to get something to voters in June. But I think we need to keep this moving, and really address it holistically, and addressing all these things in an appropriate way, so that this, if you do have one, this doesn't do this.
Yeah, I mean, this
might be
you're
hard
right.
to
You're right
engineer.
that it's not just one. It's one of three, but this was a real eye opener for most people.
Mhm.
What we had this last back to back, I
It
think.
was.
Sure. As you indicated earlier in the comments to Jeffrey when he chimed in at the non-agenda items, our waterfront did, actually weather pretty well, and that's really fortunate. I mean, anybody who's been to Belfast and seen what's happened to the Front Street docks, they just got absolutely plastered.
Mm-hmm.
The whole waterfront is just destroyed. We had boats out there, because I row out there in the water, and we had boats that were just hanging on those docks, but the boats were unbelievably not damaged, but the couldn't get to them on foot, had to go out in boats to rescue them because all of the infrastructure, all the docks connecting to the docks, the floats where they were completely destroyed. And there's going to be, months of reconstruction going. So we're really fortunate what happened, that the waterfront in Camden actually weathered, the harbor area, the inner harbor weathered pretty well.
It did.
We're
I
really
will say
fortunate.
the town landing fared very well, and so did some other properties.
That's
But
my point. Yeah,
there is
that
some
area.
significant damage though. Like the condos, Harbor Square condos, significant damage to they've got a seawall, significant damage. They have their deck and dock system, significant failure. Chunks of that were floating around too. So
yeah.
And
yeah. No, I was speaking more to what you were talking about, the landing area.
Yeah,
right.
yeah, for sure.
And how much is what about the structural integrity of what maybe wasn't wiped out, but what is it now? I mean, the next small storm that comes by, it could be compromised. Having all these back-to-back storms makes it more urgent of an issue, I think.
Yeah, and I'm in the process of trying to figure out a way to require them to hire structural engineers to certify that things are okay, and if they're not, they gotta bring them up to snuff. This makes me think of, and I hate to say it, but in Florida, there was that apartment complex, that failed.
The condo,
condo that failed and killed lots and lots and lots of people, and the building fell on itself. I mean, there were warning signs, and there are, that they missed. Well, they ignored. They didn't act on them. But there was also provisions in the building code that talks about certain structures and the maintenance requirements and inspection requirements that property owners need to do on properties of certain types. I'm not sure they apply all in this case, but and there's something actually in the building code that municipalities can hang their hat on ordering some of that. But I do think certain properties that I looked at, I'm going to be asking for structural engineers to inspect the property and provide us with documentation that things are okay. Yeah.
Jeremy, have you run into any precedent on any jurisdictions or municipalities that have put into place certain rules or inspections, etc., that deal with this in a good way?
No, not really. And I would say that I've done a fair amount of research on this, and I haven't found it done in a good way. And what I'm thinking, to be honest, is I'd like to be that leader, to be honest with you, and have Camden be that place that actually is addressing this holistically in a big picture way. And I think the Camden residents would support that. I think that the mental oomph and the social oomph that people have in Camden, if you will. I don't know if that comes across what I'm trying to explain, but I think people really care about these types of issues, and I think they're educated enough that they can put two and two together, that this makes sense to be a leader on this. I don't want to, when we do this, I don't want to have to come back 10 years from now or 5 years from now and be like, oh, we got to change it again. I'd really like to be the kind of leader at the state level, at least, on how we address this resiliency in the harbor and these types of issues. This also, I'm just going to go to another subject matter, is the armoring of shorelines. I have concern about, I understand that people's property is like this gentleman out on the highly unstable bluff that failed, 30 foot tall bank, 30 foot deep out into the ocean. I understand that's significant, but at some point the ocean and the earth does what it's supposed to do. So often we as humans think that we can, just create something or do something to control it. We can't control this. And at some point you've got to let it play out. And when people armor these shorelines, it does cause significant problems on adjacent properties. It does. And there's lots of evidence of that. So, I'm actually thinking about and toying with this idea of prohibiting. We talked about it when we were talking about bulkheads prior many months ago, about prohibiting armored shorelines, because when you armor shoreline, you also start impacting those dune areas. You start impacting the wetland areas.
Yep.
You have the potential to. Those all serve great functions, right? I mean, if the dunes weren't down in place, thankfully we don't have. Well, we have a very different geology than they do in southern Maine. But you look at the dune systems that protected. I know it might not seem like it. I don't know if you've seen the footage of Reed State Park or Popham Beach or some other places down in southern Maine. The impacts to those areas was massive. But if those dunes weren't there, the impact would be even much greater. Those dunes serve a valuable function. So I'm toying with the idea of prohibiting armoring shorelines, unless you actually need to do it to protect structures, like a residential structure. And then you've got to look not just at your property, but you got to start looking at the properties adjacent to you, and how you address that. It's, that's a much bigger topic than peers, certainly. But Pete Slavinsky, again, he's an expert, known nationally, and he's an expert in the state on this issue. And I think having him talk to you and give a presentation on how, the geomorphology of a shoreline and where streams come in and the ocean's happening and how it all works with varying kinds of shoreline, will be very insightful to you and very helpful, as you and I try to plan for a better Camden's oceanfront. I think that's in everyone's best interest. It's not just, and we're also talking about protecting property too, people's, actual structures. How do you do that better? Because we saw a lot of this armor, and it might be a DEP thing. I think their heads are spinning. I talked to one of the lead permitting and regulatory people at the state, at the end of last week or early this week, about this very issue where, it's important to armor some shorelines where you have a structure, that might be in an area that they could lose the structure, right? I mean, I grew up in Great Lakes up near Lake Erie, and big massive chunks of Lake Erie or of the shore of outside of Cleveland are just leaving into Lake Erie, and they have massive estates 5 feet from the bend, from the drop off to Lake Erie. Certainly you got to try to do something to protect those. So these are the kind of conversations and discussions I'm trying to have. But DEP, I talked to him, this is where I was going. When they're permitting some of these riprap projects, they only allow the riprap to go up to a certain level, a certain height. Well, all along, some of the riprap I've seen that's been permitted, they weren't allowed to go higher. But the actual erosion that these properties felt was higher than all of that riprap, right? So they weren't allowed to go higher, and now you have this riprap that's below, but massive erosion up above it. And where trees, large oak trees, and other vegetation were there, and now they're all gone, or they're undermined and hanging. So lots to talk about. I wanted to just try to get
Just real quick, Jeremy,
Yeah.
I'm wondering, I see Jeffrey's kind of come back to us. Jeffrey, did you have something you wanted to add, or you just sort of
I did. I just have a kind of a thought experiment for everyone. When I was 12 years old, they started talking about putting breakwaters out here in front of Camden. And when I look out now, I still don't see them, and I'm 60. So it's been a long time that's been discussed. I think much of the damage that happened here in Camden would not have happened had those been there. And an example, if you go down to Rockland and see what happened to Rockland on last Wednesday, the parts of the harbor that are protected by the breakwater, none of this happened. If you go over to the landings, if you saw what happened there, if you notice where the breakwater is, the breakwater stops there, and the landings is a disaster. So I think that if somebody said, what's the thing that could really keep most of this from happening? It would be a breakwater. And
Right. And
I
which
don't know what I
Jeremy
don't know what
indicated
the
is
I don't know what
definitely
the
on the
second,
table,
third,
but is
fourth, and
also a
fifth.
monumental task.
Exactly. But it
Yeah.
sounds to me like
I mean, way beyond the purview of the planning board,
yes, no, hopefully the
right?
town might get behind something
Well,
like
that's why Jeremy indicated in his comments, that he's using that grant to do the more the
yes,
resiliency study as opposed to infrastructure, hopefully, because as you're indicating, this problem is way bigger than all of us sitting here, and it needs a holistic approach. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. We're unfortunately limited in this discussion to
sure.
how we regulate peers. And so it really is just a small piece of the pie, but
Yes,
it's an unfortunate turn of events that has led us to having such a grave discussion, because just 2 weeks ago we were having the same discussion about, well, aesthetically, how bad are these piers, or this sort of thing, and next thing you know, they're all gone. And none of us anticipated that. I don't think even this, like, I'm a doomsday guy when it comes to sea level rise and that sort of thing, and I didn't anticipate all the piers being wiped out in one weekend.
right. There's a lot of
So
fact between here and Islesboro, between here and Vinyl Haven.
yeah, yeah. So again,
Just to
yeah,
put
you are, as Jeremy indicated, you are absolutely encouraged to touch base with him and lend your voice to that.
yeah.
And I do envision some sort of a, possibly, there's a harbor committee, but there may be eventually a harbor resilience committee, or something that comes out of this, but that will be beyond the scope of the planning board, and we're going to continue to address what's in our purview. Go ahead, Jeremy.
I just wanted to just good points, Jeff. I appreciate it. There's a marine contractor out of the Booth Bay area, and he knows over 100 piers in that area alone were demolished and destroyed. So, I mean, when John talked earlier about the contractors' availability to rebuild some of these piers, Proc had a at least 2 year waiting list, and then I mean, it's just the devastation's massive. So there's no time, and sometimes it does require, crisis and disaster. Creates the oomph to get towns and people, to change their course on certain things, or to bring things to a head. And sometimes you need that, and obviously we needed something, or we got to do something. This is not going away. Again, there's been 3 of these, and appreciate that they haven't been as bad as the last 2, but 3 massive storms in 13 months.
And, if you just think from an erosion perspective, I always, obviously a lot of Camden Harbor has been filled. If you look at any of the photos from, 1890 to about 1915, you can see that. I always think a lot of that fill a lot like asbestos and lead paint. The best asbestos and lead paint is the asbestos that's intact and covered, and the best lead paint is the paint that's covered and not exposed. And I think we need to keep this fill right where it is and not let it erode.
Yeah.
Because that's all going to end up in the harbor, and that can't be good for the eelgrass or anything else.
Right. Yep. Ethan, that's kind of all I had today. I don't really need a whole heck of a lot of direction, but I think it's important for us to bring in some experts. I'm going to try to do that for the next meeting with you guys. And then I'll narrow down some possible what's possible as far as new criteria and new standards for peers. I'll
Sure.
narrow that down some. Does that all make sense?
It does. And I thought, I know we were talking about going through, and Jeremy, by the way, I just want to say, I really appreciate all of the work that you've done on this, because it's gone from this minor sort of thing that came off the cuff for me, like ban all peers, to like this really involved discussion. And I know it's driven a lot by the Uliani decision and what we can and cannot do. And, the the colonial right and all these things, which are really interesting when if you think about maritime law and if you're interested in those things, but it also becomes an obstacle and a hurdle to doing what's right for, the community. But I'm happy to sort of move this along. All of the information you've given us. I guess I would say that I would encourage the board to think about these individual criteria that Jeremy has listed, right? And that's what, generally our plan was to sort of go through them one by one tonight, but Christo bailed on us. It's getting late. So, I mean, if anybody wants to join in and jump in right now, I'm happy to have some feedback or some discussion, but I'm probably not going to go through each individual criteria right now and sort of let the board digest and think about where we want to go. I mean, Jeremy's given you a lot of information. I have looked over I've reviewed the Uliani decision at length, and I think it's really informative. And I think it's important to understand, if you're looking at what is allowed, the criteria that we have set forth are allowed. We are allowed to regulate. The colonial right is not an inalienable right. That's like the last line of the decision. Okay. So the right to wharf a boat is goes back to whatever date, but it is not inalienable. And the criteria that the court considered were in fact the viewscape, the aesthetics, the alternative methods like having a dinghy, having a dinghy launch or using a marina that's a few miles away.
Or
and then, of course,
actually having a boat.
well, yeah, I mean, that's another discussion altogether, is whether a pier owner actually owns a boat or not.
Or uses their pier.
Or use the boat. I mean, well, anybody that knows sailboats can tell you that they spend 6 months on a mooring and go off the mooring 4 or 5 times maximum, and that's like a high number for most sailboats. They sit out there and they don't get used. But the court was very clear that you can regulate based on the various criteria that are being listed here. And if that regulation makes it impracticable or difficult to get a permit, that is not a violation of that colonial right, because that right is not inalienable. So we are in a position right now where we need to just be looking at it from a perspective of what is best as far as regulation, what makes sense. And Jeremy's given us a lot of information to look over and consider. And, I mean, if I was a person, and I know I'm not a person who lives on the waterfront and has a several $1 million house and several $100,000 invested in a pier, but if that pier disappeared and then it was uninsurable, and I was liable for the cleanup costs of that pier, and I used it once or twice, 3 times a year at best, I would be weighing whether or not there was any utility to having a pier. Now, I'm not saying that all these owners will do that. They may be attached to the idea of having a pier. But I do think, and the piers that are destroyed can be, I think, by general, operation of law, can be reconstructed, but they must be reconstructed, I think, to whatever standards we set. And so we have to think about that as well. I made a joke to Jeremy, and it may not be funny to anybody. But when you're looking at the viewscape right now, the old argument would be, well, there's already piers, so there could be more piers. Well, we've kind of wiped that slate clean, and there are no piers. And we do have a rare opportunity here, perhaps, to look at this as, the coastal resource, the viewscape of being pier free as a valuable thing. And also, the department has already determined that any shoreline wetland is a significant resource, a significant viewscape, and those sorts of things. So there's a lot of room here to regulate and going through the criteria. But does anybody on the board have anything that they feel they want to discuss at this moment? I see John's unmuting. Good. Okay, good, John. Go. I'll mute.
In our previous discussions, I think I was a little bit on the leaned a little bit more towards less regulation than some of my colleagues on the planning board. And, you know, the storm has had an impact on how I see some of this. You know, I think exploring the velocity zone as a prohibition is probably valid. Certainly the environmental issues, I think we can use those to our benefit. And, you know, I would be interested going forward if we could figure out how many of these people who did lose their pier in this last storm, how many of them are really contemplating rebuilding them. The other point I'd make in terms of the aesthetic aesthetics entering into the equation, you know, I don't know if we have viewpoints and views of significance, if that's been mapped out at all. But I was struck, and this was before I was on the planning board, I just happened to be seeing a discussion perhaps at the select board level, you know, a newly constructed pier that was eliminating the view of Curtis Island from Lake Beach. And, you know, if that had been in place as an important view shed, you know, that's the type of, that's a legitimate view to protect that I think
That's a good point.
we should look
Yeah,
for
it's a great point, and I'll just read to you really briefly. The couple of standards you mentioned the viewpoint in the Uliano decision. The board specifically found that the Uliano's proposed pier would be a significant visual intrusion for persons walking the intertidal area, and that the pier would have a significant adverse scenic and aesthetic impact on the uses of the area by boaters. Having found that the degree of impact on those existing and scenic and aesthetic uses would be significant, the board then found that the degree of impact would be unreasonable because, among other reasons, the applicants do have at least one practical alternative that would be less damaging to the environment. And that alternative is a dinghy haul out system or using the marina. Right. And again, that's so this idea of this colonial right is not inalienable. And above that, just real briefly, Section 5A of the Wetland Protection Rules provides that no activity shall be permitted if there is a practicable alternative to the project that would be less damaging to the environment. So these are pretty rigid standards, and certainly can be applied in these situations. And so that's why I think, you know, Jeremy's given us all this excellent data and information, and we're going to hear from some other people. But I think, you know, that's you'd be looking at those issues of access, you know, alternatives, the environment, you know, the responsibility for the damage, and then, you know, the viewscapes and everything. You know, and I agree with you, John, that's a significant aspect of it. Did you have more?
That's it.
I got
Okay, great.
Just following up really quick on the view shed. I think it's important to remember we have other properties, you know, town access points, Marine Ave. There's one on Harbor Road, actually. Harbor Road, Marine Ave. We've got a bunch of those, and that would be, I think that's a very valid point, looking at view sheds from that public resource, because that is a public resource. You know, good point, John. Thank you.
And also the access, just walking, fishing and fouling, you know, and boating, you know, kayaks and everything else. So
yeah.
Anyone else? Pat, Lucia?
Well, I thought it was interesting on how the outcomes differed so much between two docks right within the Somme Sound area. The Uliano case, well, the judge dissented against it. And then this other case in Somme Sound, they didn't go along with having the pier installed. And I just thought it was interesting because, well, they were both in the same location. And they, yeah.
I'm sorry, which other case are you speaking to, Pat?
The other one is in the NOAA visual document that Jeremy sent out, case study 2, and that's also located right within Somme Sound.
That's where I do my camping up there. In fact, my background right there that you're looking at is Somme Sound.
Oh, did you live there?
No, I camp. That's where I mean, I literally go there to camp in the summer,
Oh,
twice a
okay.
year. Yeah. Yeah, I think, I'll look that over. I think a lot of it has to do with the work that the permitting agency did to identify the factors or criteria that Jeremy's laying out for us. And I think that's the important aspect, is that you can't just say no pier, no go. You have to like identify all of these different things and go through and say you've got habitat, you've got viewscape, you've got alternatives, those sorts of things. But
Which I
again, I
think
haven't looked at that recently.
they probably proved a little more in a better manner in this case, in this NOAA visual document that Jeremy sent out, as far as having that view shed and how it disrupted.
Oh, I guess I'm confused. The Uliano decision upheld the denial of a pier.
Right, that one did, but there's this other Somme Sound case study in that NOAA visualization document that Jeremy sent out.
Yeah.
That they did not go along with construction of a pier.
Wait,
So
that's
similar to what
that's
Uliana.
confusing me. Yeah, I'm confused again because the Uliana decision, as far as I understand, the court upheld the denial of a permit to construct the pier.
I thought they didn't in the Uliana.
No, they upheld it. They upheld it. The dissent that you referenced railed against it, but that's just one judge dissenting from the decision. The main decision upheld the denial of the permit.
Oh, okay.
And so the other one that you're referencing, it sounds like they also upheld the denial of the permit. So
Yeah.
it's essentially the
Validates
same
it.
outcome.
It validates that piece. Yep.
And that's what the whole, that's why this path has been lit for us, if I may say it that way. But like
Yeah.
the criteria are out there, and all we need to do is make sure that we implement them, put them into the ordinance in a way that is reasonable and fair. We're not trying to necessarily deny anybody anything, but at the same time, using these criteria, it may well be that it's impractical to get a permit.
Right.
Yeah.
Ethan, I think it'd be helpful if I kind of take some of this stuff and kind of add it to, or come up with some new standards for you guys to review, and then, just kind of move it forward along that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll do that.
I was forced to talk more than I was supposed to because Chris so quit on us.
I know.
His internet went out.
Well, I just want to say I'm just amazed at that this has all happened, and and it's stunning. I mean, I'm here in Colorado where we're dealing with avalanches, so the water damage and everything is just been amazing to see, and yeah, it's obvious that something has to be done. I look forward to hearing from Peter and the various other things coming forward to help us make some decisions.
Great.
Thanks, Lucia. Thanks for joining. I know you had a little difficulty getting in as well. Not always easy when you're on the road.
Yeah.
Stephanie, did you want to jump in at all? I know you're here sort of as a select board. Okay, just here to listen. Got it. Well, thanks for sitting through it.
Same to you, Jeff.
And Jeffrey, thanks for jumping in and sharing your thoughts. And again, as
Thanks for
Jeremy said,
hearing me out. I appreciate it.
yeah, urge you to get in touch if you want
Jeremy, I'll
to
be in touch.
more involved.
Okay.
I'm sure you will.
Thank you.
Great. Okay. Other than that, then everybody's all set. I'm gonna go ahead and call for an adjournment of this workshop. Do we need to schedule anything going forward?
No, we'll just shoot for the next meeting. It won't be a hearing, so we don't have to do it. We'll just shoot for the next, would be February 1st, actually. So, but yeah, it's time to like get stuff rolling for sure, because by mid-March, end of March, March 21st is probably when we have to have our final hearings by to get stuff to the select board with recommendations for warrant articles. I did get the dates from the town clerk. I just didn't look at them yet.
That's fine. I will just throw this out there then, because I know all of our absent planning board members will watch this video in its entirety. If you have any comments or feedback on the STR ordinance, I'm speaking to the planning board members specifically, you need to submit those to Shenley, at least for consideration, before the next meeting.
Yeah.
Because we're really getting down to the 11th hour here. And so that we're looking at finalizing this language. And so the language that Pat gave, the feedback and all that stuff was important and will be incorporated. But we need to be at a point where we're saying finalized language. Don't worry about the number on the cap that John's still thinking about, because we're waiting on data. But the language on the definitions and those sorts of things, we really need to get feedback to Shenley for the next meeting. Lucia, your hands up.
Yeah. Can I just ask, I did write in because I was on a plane the day before, unexpectedly, the day before we had the last meeting, and I did make quite a few comments on the text of the STR. I just want to make sure that Shenley and Jeremy received that. Well, I sent it to everyone, but that you all received
it. Yeah, we did get it,
Okay.
and I think we talked it over some of it, but if I guess what I would suggest is if suggestions that you made did not get into this most recent working draft, you probably need to raise them again.
Okay. Yep.
I'm pretty sure that most of that stuff was considered.
Okay.
Right?
Do you want me to do that before the next meeting or at the next meeting?
Before.
It's got to be before. So Shenley, maybe tomorrow we can get just the updated with Pat's and my feedback on the definitional names.
Perfect. Yep.
You could send that out just because that's a minor change, and with the dates of the ADUs put in there.
Okay.
If you guys recall, that was the only other significant change, was that the ADUs went back to 97, not to 2019, right. Which is pretty significant, but it was the law, so we can't really help it. And then so you'll have what is our final working draft, Lucia, and then any suggestions you have to that, let's get them in before the next. You have 2 weeks to get them in to the next meeting.
And we'll try to get you guys a copy of that final draft sooner than later, so you have some time to digest it and give us comments. Remember, just share. You can share the comments, but there's no communication or discussion about the comments that you have.
Right. These are one-way communications to the entire board and to Shenley and Jeremy. So
Okay.
Excellent. Well, thanks again, everybody, for your time and your work on this, on all these difficult issues, and for your patience and for dealing with my gravelly voice. But we'll reconvene in a couple weeks.
Thank you, guys.